Did you see this stuff? So the UFC have come out to defend their fighter pay. Essentially, a report came out by the New York Post, I believe. The New York Post is the rag, isn't it? I'm pretty sure it's the rag.
No clue.
Like it's a tabloid. It's not like the New York Times. It's like more of the broadsheet, and you have New York Post, which is a bit of a like the Sun.
And the New York Times and stuff.
Yeah, but New York Times I think is more so like the good one, and the New York Post I think is more of the like the Mirror or the thing. So whatever. But anyway, they come out and they show the revenues that are spent or that are paid to fighters.
Yeah, I mean, we knew the proportion going to fighters was piss poor anyway.
Yeah, what was it, like 13%?
16%, I think.
Something very, very low. And now they've come out with another report saying that the MMA fighters who are currently in a lawsuit against the UFC and I think a few others are very upset with the UFC paying the like 300 million dividend from their cash reserves to their celebrity investors and their owners. Now, I thought this was very interesting because there's a few little bits and pieces that I looked into for this one, and I think it's actually very important for MMA fans to know this, especially if you're an MMA fan who follows the sport and the business side of it. I think there's a lot to it. So, Bloody Elbows business analyst John Nash, who we're big fans of, we read a lot of his stuff, he pointed out the stark difference between the UFC and their competitors. So their competitors mainly would be Bellator, and Bellator essentially in the year for 2014 their best revenue was only 1/10 of that of the UFC. So the UFC saying that they pay more than any other promoter in MMA is a bit of a red herring for me. So there's no like for like comparison there. And then he's done another comparison, John Nash, where he said if they add Bellator, their revenue, to the PFL and 3 other MMA organisations of the other major ones, the UFC has 90% of that revenue, of all them promotions. 90%. So the UFC are in a completely different world than all these other promotions. So for them to come out and say that they're paying more than them, it's insane.
I mean, obviously you're paying more than them.
Yeah, obviously. You have to be. And you should be paying a hell of a lot more because you're worth a hell of a lot more. Now, one other thing that I actually seen coincidentally last night was I was watching Miles Jury. Do you remember Miles Jury, former UFC fighter, fights for Bellator now? He has a YouTube channel. And I got suggested this video, and it was how much I got paid against Cowboy Cerrone, which was, I believe, a co-main event or else a main event.
Okay.
And he went through all the numbers. And I think you're going to like this one, or you're going to enjoy this thing. So he made 19k to show. He didn't win the fight, so he didn't get his win bonus. So I believe his win bonus would have matched that. Now, that wasn't actually his show money because he made 3k in a locker room bonus. So it was actually 16k.
Yeah, these locker room bonuses are important as well because in the lawsuit it has come out that there is undisclosed pay as well.
Exactly. So he made, his actual pay was 16k to show, 16k to win, I assume. He didn't mention that. And then it was a 3k bonus, so 19k. Now this is where I find it, or I think it gets very, very interesting because it's something that's kind of got lost in the shuffle and it's something that people don't really talk about anymore. He revealed how much he made from sponsorships. Now this was a big one because back in the day, Brendan Schaub, and we have a screenshot of this here, Brendan Schaub, when the UFC announced their Reebok deal, he said that he has lost a serious amount of money because he used to make 6 figures in sponsorship pay for each of his last 6 fights before that. Of course, if you remember what happened, Dana White came out and disputed that and said that was nonsense, that didn't happen. And apparently Brendan Schaub showed...
I don't know how Dana would know how much guys are making on their own sponsorships.
Exactly. And I think it's funny because we're never getting Dana White in the show.
No.
Because Dana White always comes out and says, listen, we don't tell you what fighters make. How do you know? How can you say what they make? But Dana White done the exact same thing here where he disputed what Brendan Schaub said he made.
It's like when he came out and said, we're not judges when Jones
exactly
lost.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is there. But I thought this was interesting. So Miles Jury came out and he said, as I said, what he made from sponsorships was 25k for that fight.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
25k. He made 16k to show from the UFC. So he made substantially more money than what he made from the UFC. Now this is where it gets really interesting. If you look at the Reebok's pay scale, the updated one, so the one from now, which has actually been bumped up since then, or since, I guess, Miles Jury left the UFC or whatever. If you look at what he would have made under that policy,
at the time, or what he would make now?
What he would make now, because the policy wasn't around, so he made essentially his own sponsorships.
Sorry, yeah.
So what he would have made from that policy, 5k.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
5k.
Yeah.
He would have made 20% of what he made from sponsorships.
Yeah. So yeah, the question on the screen here is, are the UFC ripping off fighters? I mean, it's a pretty simple answer. The answer is yes. They're a private organisation private organizations aren't charities. I'm not defending the UFC here. I'm just totally saying how they run. Private organizations aren't charities. They're not doing anything for the good of the heart. They're a business. They want profits.
Yeah.
They're all about cost minimization and profit maximization.
They're doing their job well.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're a shareholder in that company, you're like, fuck yeah, give me my dividend.
Yeah.
It's not the fighters are contractors to the UFC. In boxing, you have a
contractors now.
Yeah,
like
that's the word.
No, they technically are.
That's the word. Like.
Yeah, they are, but like they're not. Like they're exclusively.
They're totally not.
Yeah,
but that's the word that's used.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go with boxing, Anthony Joshua owns his own shows.
Yeah.
So he pays a commission. He's
basically self-employed.
Essentially, he pays his promoter to promote.
Yeah.
Whereas the UFC pays fighters to get their heads kicked in, and they take all the money, and we'll give you a little bit.
Yeah.
It's flipped. The roles are flipped essentially.
Yeah.
And it should be flipped in. Someone will come in at some point, I think, and flip it.
Yeah, I think it will eventually happen.
Or either the UFC will be forced to flip it.
Yeah.
They're totally ripping off fighters. We pay more than Bellator. That's a cop-out.
Yeah.
The Reebok thing is a sham.
Yeah. So the Reebok thing, they've actually changed it. So it used to be called the Reebok pay scale. And I think
athletes.
Now it's the athlete promotional. So it's you get money for wearing the Reebok gear, and then you also get money for doing a certain level of promotion throughout the fight week.
You also get money for monies associated to your t-shirt sold and stuff.
Yeah. So the reason why I say he would have made 5k at the time is because for fighters with between 6 and 10 fights, you get 5k. So you don't start getting, like, the champions get 40k promotional.
Even
then, like, that's like if he had to make the same amount of money he made for what he previously made. Now, I mean, we're taking Miles Jury at his word, but a co-main event of a huge card, like, that was one of the biggest sellers of that year, and one of the biggest sellers probably of all time. If you have to look at what tier he would have had to be in, he had to have been in the 16 to 20 fights. Oh no, the 21 plus.
Sure, who's
21 plus fights he would have had to make 20k, so even still less.
Like if Brendan Schaub was making 6+ figures in his fights, I know people knew who he was. He wasn't a champion.
No, I mean, he didn't even have his podcast back then.
If you look at, I'm just thinking, if you look at some of the sponsorships that guys had, like Anderson Silva was sponsored by Nike and Xbox.
Yeah.
There are some damn lucrative sponsorships.
Yeah.
I know that's Anderson Silva, so you're obviously taking someone from the top. Yeah. But if you have Miles Jury making 25k, and then
you'd well believe it, because they could have like multiple sponsors on their thing.
And then Schaub, who wasn't at the top of the division, making 6+ figures.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
That Reebok thing is a joke.
It is. It's absolute.
And there surely has to be grounds for loss of earnings, though.
Yeah.
I imagine that will come up in the lawsuit.
That's what's in the lawsuit. Yeah, loss of earnings.
But now, it's a sham.
A few caveats, as we said. Like, we don't know exactly all the money that are being paid, but we've seen enough now that guys like John Nash have reported on it, and they've shown that, you know, the money that they're making off these deals and all this stuff is substantially less than what they should be.
Yeah.
And then also the other caveat, it's up to the fighter. Like, it's all well us saying they're not being paid enough, but like, if these guys
they're their own worst enemy.
If these guys aren't gonna, you know, unionize or mobilize with each other, nothing's gonna happen. Like, I mean, the UFC have just signed huge deals with ESPN. The fighters don't get anything from it, and like, I'm not saying that they have no one else to blame but themselves, but at the end of the day, like, us talking about it, people like Luke Thomas and everyone else who used to talk about it, like, that's doing nothing. It's up to the fighter to try and negotiate it, but also it's up to guys at the top to try and negotiate it. And unfortunately, they're the ones making the lion's share of the money, so they probably won't.
Yeah, I think, like the caveat, as you said, I think we've seen enough in all the redacted documents from the lawsuit and case from John Nash to say that fighters aren't in a position where they can maximise their earnings.